So welcome to The Mask and the Mirror, Aidan. I'm really excited and happy to have you with me. And ever since I came across your work, I was wishing that you would say yes to this interview. Because for me, it was both groundbreaking and deeply moving at the same time. So I know that it's not very fashionable today to be emotional, but I will start this really emotionally and say that when I read The Crossroader, you include in your second book, and your definition of magic, which I've never seen anyone express his love and how he sees magic, his view of magic, the way that you have it, it almost moved me to tears. On a personal level, because I see your work as the direct offspring of a tetrarchy of people that put me on this path, which we have in common, as we briefly discussed, Jan Fries, Jason Miller, Andrew Chambley, and Austin Osman Spare. I could see their influence in your work, but at the same time, I could say something that is very unique and like I said, I haven't seen before. And that is the emphasis that you put on the field and its inhabitants versus the magician themselves in this like very anthropocentric view. You say specifically, magic is the art of falling in love with the field and its inhabitants. So I see in general this feeling a big gap in magical literature, because, allow me to call it, that it's very masculine at the moment. And I don't mean that in a sense of gender or sex, but in the sense that it's very Faustian. Yeah, very egocentric in a way. And it goes a bit like this, oh, we're these badass guys, we summon demons, and we have this and this and that grade of initiation, and we collect psychedelic experiences like they were stamps. This emphasis on the human aspect and the magician in a way that makes magic look a bit like a party trick to gather like attention to ourselves, something that is not organic. And what you call the field and its inhabitants are seen as the marginal, sidekicks to the magician, and not as the center. And you take this and you put it up front and center in your work. So I would like to talk a bit, to begin with, about the field and what you describe as the others. What is your definition of this, and how you became aware of the field in the first place?
There's a lot to unpack in that chunk, and thank you for kind of seeing that piece of it as being in the forefront, because it really is to me. And so I guess I'm going to start a little bit in the back, and then we'll work our way up to that. Yeah. So my initial experiences, which I talk about in Weaving Fate with magic, were pretty organic. And then the folks that I first kind of fell into experiencing other magicians were either pretty much thelemic ceremonial magicians, or California neo-pagan Wiccans. And the Wiccan side where I was in Berkeley at the time, was so, now we would say LARPing, like live action role-playing, right? And this is just on the appearance level, and this is seen 30-something years later. But to me, what I thought at the time was like, wow, this is really like Ren Fair focused. Like everybody was super done up, everybody was really beautiful clothes. It was very much about the kind of pageantry, and it was very devotional religious work, right? Which makes sense. It's a religious, agricultural based thing. So I understood that, went, okay, that's not really my take here. And then I had the same kind of response that you were talking to the more ceremonial magic side, though that's really where I started working, because it made more sense to me than anything else. Initially, like, okay, there's a system here you can play in to explore. And I always had that view. It's like, it wasn't a system to learn. It was that there are tools here that you could explore and see what happens when you use them, was my take. And over time, I realized that I had just a very different headspace than most of the people that I knew. And it was again in Weaving Fate, I kind of talk about the things that made sense to me were like more the Haitian voodoo stuff that was available back then from Maya Deren and Milo Rigaud and Alfred Natreau. Wow. And a lot of the things that were being written by either Native Americans or stuff from other cultures that were more what we would think of, and using it as a general term, as shamanic religion, which really to me was that they were interfacing with something that they viewed as this themselves as a piece of, that they weren't in control of the whole thing, which is the piece that I often had issues with ceremonial magic. And so the field kind of developed out of, as I use the term, out of that concept, but without trying to fully absorb somebody else's approach. Like, how do I think about it? What am I experiencing in here? And the field was the general view that I'm a component part of this larger whole that is itself sentient in some way and reactive in some way and responsive in some way. And that the way to work well in there was to have allies there. That it wasn't, I didn't find that I could kind of convince myself if I played really hard and kind of what I viewed as a more thelemic view, and that's not saying this is anybody else's view of thelema, where it was all about my will and stuff. I could get stuff done, but it was messy. It wasn't.
There was a lot of interference.
There was a lot of interference, and it felt like everything was forced. And as I moved more and more into kind of like, you bring up Jason Miller, he was a huge, he wasn't around when I started, but when I came back to magic after a break, I found his stuff. And his description of kind of using offerings as a base made sense of a lot of stuff I'd been doing. Like the more, what we would now say is kind of, witches of Instagram kind of thing that gets bagged on. But when I would take my time to find the kind of altar settings or offering setups that felt right to me and that looked right to me aesthetically and just felt correct to whatever I was kind of trying to do, everything worked better.
Yes.
And
the ambiance, as he calls it, as well. It's important.
So all of that kind of worked together for me to kind of then go, okay, so what do I think if I drop everything that I know from study and reading and other people's interpretations, what do I think is going on? And that was kind of a long process to come up with a story and a narrative that made sense to me and didn't feel forced anywhere. And so that's where that whole concept of kind of falling in love with the field, like if I couldn't engage in that way, I was way less successful. And if I could engage in that way, even if I didn't really know what I was trying to do precisely, which we're kind of taught that you have to be super precise, right? Very scientific method of science, aim of religion, shit from Crowley. That if I could tap into what I talk about in Weaving Fate a lot is the feeling sense of what I was after, it was just wildly successful. Like, okay, this doesn't make sense because this is not what you're supposed to do. But it's what consistently works for me. And then playing with kind of putting that information out there through 6 Ways or my blog or my talismanic work and talking to people about the talismans. I found that there were a lot of people who had been very quiet, but kind of felt very similar things, but it's so unfashionable.
Yeah.
And you're so likely to get kind of bagged on by the folks that really want, in my mind, kind of what you would say is that what you were saying about kind of the masculine controlled, more scientific, more materialist, even if we're dealing with spirits view of kind of hierarchy and domination and things like that. It's letting go of so much control that I think that is really the key, right?
Yeah.
Is you go, okay, this is...
It's funny because all this, the hierarchies, classifying magic as high magic and low magic grades, all this kind of stuff, it really speaks to the dominant culture rather than any kind of counterculture. This is exactly how the dominant culture functions. You have hierarchy, you have the classification of culture into high and lowbrow, and this creates a lot of division. And I always found that peculiar about our community, let's call it that, of sorcerers, is your preferred term, because I feel like we're already under attack. You know, the dreaming is at war at the moment with everything from the outside. So if we're also divided inside, then it's game over, basically. And
I totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting because I was part of the Temple of Psychic Youth from about 87 to maybe 91 or something like that. And in 1990, I spent some time with Genesis and Alora at their place in Brighton. And one of the conversations that I had that has stuck with me forever with Genesis was about this very thing of like, why do subcultures, whatever they are, tend to bring in those kind of like most, our thought at the time, debilitating and kind of harmful aspects of the parent culture. Like they'll eject all sorts of stuff, but they tend to bring in that, let's categorize everything as what's acceptable or unacceptable, or like you said, high, low magic, all of that stuff. And I think it's an interesting question, because I think it just goes to kind of human social dynamics, right? That this is at least how we've all been raised in systems that look like this. And it's very, very hard to kind of step outside of that, whether on a group level or on a personal level.
I really like how you mentioned the allies, and these are not necessarily human beings that you were reaching out to, but other inhabitants of the field, the spiritual intelligences that you call to you. Either you invoke them or they're attracted to you on their own because you're on the same frequency as them, the same wavelength, and then there is this collaboration. And you underlined offerings and how things started to work without any interference, without anything feeling like it was forced after you started that, because it's like any other relationship, isn't it? If you go into somebody's country without taking the time to know anything about their culture, a few words in their own language, bring something with you to offer to them as well, it's not gonna go as smoothly as it would otherwise, and maybe it will feel like an invasion in any kind of like somebody's home, you know. And I think this is what many people in this field do not realize, that when you open a circle and you summon something or you invoke something, it's not about demonstrating your own power. I can do this, look at me, I can command that spirit. It's, if this is your worldview, if it's truly your worldview, this is another being. You cannot force it into collaboration with you without expecting some resistance, at least. And also pretending that you do know how things work on their level of reality. So
that piece was huge for me because, again, I didn't like, I think there was no point that I liked the process of kind of trying to command a spirits. Like I did some experimentation in there, but I didn't like it. It never felt right.
I had the same experience as a younger person. That's how I learned as you.
Yeah.
We share quite a similar journey.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting thing, and it's something that I talk to people a lot about, and it's one of the kind of oddities of magic too, because it's either that makes sense to you, and then there's this whole range of fields of magical work that are appear to be totally logical internally, right? And if they don't, I think that kind of can throw people into strange places. Like, where do I fit in if I don't do that? But maybe I'm not a devotional religious person, or maybe I am, but I'm not viewing it in a normal way that someone would view a relationship with the gods, right? And that idea of going into it as a relationship and kind of being, I remember talking to my friend Marek, who was the person I learned jewelry from, and we talked about the process of doing magic with spirits for us became like putting up ads in like the relationship newspapers, right? Going like, I'm into this. I like these things, and I would like to do these things, and I would like to meet people who would like to do these things. And it was way more both nebulous, right? Kind of vague in a way. It wasn't as concrete. But it also just felt way more natural to go into circle, and instead of going, okay, there's this spirit that helps you find treasure or helps with wealth or whatever, to instead go in and open up that space and make offerings and go, this is what I'm trying to do in my life. And I don't want to do this entirely on my own. And I don't necessarily even believe that it makes sense to try and do it entirely on my own. And so who is down to play? And let's enter into a relationship. And it's just such an open and, for me, very freeing way of working. And the more I kind of dove into that full on, the more I realized this is, to me, a spirit-driven process. And I talk about this in a number of places, that to me, I think we're surrounded. Like we were talking about the wind spirits, like whether that is the wind, whether that is the ocean, whether that is the land spirits, whether that is ancestral spirits, whether that is the dead in your neighborhood. They're all over the place. And you don't really have to know exactly what they are. You just kind of have to know that you get along, or how to get along, or how to not trespass, right? I had a friend recently who was having a really terrible time in a new city. And she's kind of a powerhouse. And I said, well, have you kind of addressed that directly with the city spirit? And kind of set her with the homework of like, figure out where you think the city spirit is. Like, get on your bike and ride around and see what feels to you like the potent core of the city, which is not probably going to be downtown. It's probably, it could be, but it's not necessarily. And then start making offerings and going, hey, I'm new here. I can tell this is a little weird. Can we smooth things out? And it was interesting because she really did have a solid, she's like me, she doesn't see really clearly about these things, but she got really solid feedback through, I think, her cards and then just feeling senses, and found that there was a place that she now goes and spends time. And, you know, kind of what I talk about in 6 ways, she'll pick up a couple cups of coffee and a couple of pastries and just leave one of those there. And her whole experience of that shifted. And it was, I think, my interpretation, and this is her interpretation too, is that it was kind of like the response was like, hey, you know better. You know I'm here. You know I have to be here. Why are you not talking to me before you start this project you're doing? And it's odd because it's just, I think it's a very old way of being. It's not modern. And so it can be very uncomfortable.
You said it's not modern, it's a very old way of being, which is absolutely true. Most people today, the ones that do not belong to the magical community, that are like the realist, the materialist paradigm that looks down on this, and they're like, this is something archaic, this is something that doesn't exist. It is a choice, actually. In places like Iceland, you have the official government asking those beings if it is allowed to build in specific places. So it is really a choice how you're going to view your reality, and if you're going to choose to be respectful towards other beings, or be solipsistic and just think that everything takes place inside your own head and nothing else. And when you say it's not a new way of being, throughout your work, I've noticed you emphasize the importance of remembrance. You say magic is really remembering. it's not something to discover now, like a curio or a new trend. It is something that we have lost. How do you think we came to this tragic, in my opinion, condition of having forgotten our heritage, having lost our memory? And what can we do to gain it back?
I have, I just have to go with that one. I kind of have to go purely with my own thing. And so I'm not saying this is right, but this is my take. Mm-hmm. I think we're dealing with a clash of just immense lengths of time as non-settled beings in the way that we are now, where we had no choice but to be incredibly aware of the spaces we were moving through. Mm-hmm. And then this shifted, and it's very questionable currently as to what exact point this happened, as kind of more extensive animal domestication and kind of plant agriculture developed in different places in the world, which causes you to kind of settle and be able to stay in one place. And then you kind of get to be able to develop this idea that I have control in a way that I don't think probably any hunter-gatherer culture ever thought they had control. And I think that it allows you to move further and further away. And I think if we look at someplace like Iceland and go, well, that's a place that came very late to Christianity.
The latest of them all, actually, yeah.
Related to most places, you know. It makes sense to me. And also they're a very small culture. They're a very isolated, kind of insulated culture, especially up until, I don't know, probably what, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. They weren't really forced out of that as fast as everybody else was, or as deeply out of that sense. And so it makes sense to me. And from talking to folks that I've known from there, they kind of thought that that was probably a reasonable way to think about it. I think that this is just an odd way to live that we're living now. And so I used to blame it entirely on Christianity and the Abrahamic religions. But I think it's more that comes out of these changes into agricultural cultures. The point that you can store up enough grain to have a city also means that you can hoard that grain to control the population.
Yeah, you become an owner. There comes ownership instead of
and you kind of develop,
yeah.
Right, and it kind of allows you to shift into kind of city states and feudal states. If we look at kind of earliest Rome to Rome later, to that whole expansion of power and standing armies and this kind of route to empire as a good thing. I think all of that stuff together kind of piles on all of this, what to me is like illogic and ill health, and almost what I think of as kind of spirit sickness, because I think we're now so far in, and as the good and the bad of things like the internet and the ability of mass media and social media, I think everybody can feel that those narratives, that these are all good things. You know, coming from the US, we have this narrative that we are this benevolent force in the world, which most people in the world would not agree with, right? That weren't other governments that are, you know, willing to play with us. I think all of that stuff is beginning to break apart. And so now you don't get to have that comforting narrative that your place as a citizen of Rome, more or less, wherever you are, whatever country you're in, is necessarily a good thing that you should have pride in, and you should just accept the story that's handed down. I think all of that stuff is breaking down right now. And so there is a great deal of kind of searching for something different. And I know I'm off topic of your question a bit here, but I think it's worth thinking about. But right now, like particularly in the US, it's fascinating. Like you go, okay, everybody's excited because theoretically the election is over, and there's a bunch of folks who now have an option to go back into power and do things differently. And I'm not saying that I don't even agree with a lot of that, but that's not the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Those are all symptomatic of the problem, that we're not connected in a way that makes sense. And so we're kind of all insane. And to me, magic. Yep. And the others, I think, are like, what the hell are you all doing? This is not why, even if we look at kind of like stuff that comes out through like the Evans Wentz fairy faith and Celtic countries and things like that, where even then they were saying like the others were basically backing away because of what was going on culturally in those areas and civilization wise in those areas. And I think that this is happening more and more. And I think even if people don't have an overtly magical viewpoint, I think people feel it. And I think it's very difficult to, how do you know how to be well when things are that far out of alignment?
Exactly.
And I know I did a radical digression there.
No, it's not a digression at all, because it actually leads to the second part of my question, what I meant to say. Because if you are not ill in such a place, then probably you are. Then that's when you're really ill. If you cannot feel the fragmentation and the pain and the alienation that most of us actually experience. And I really like the term others that you came up with to describe those non-human intelligences, creatures, because otherness is something that we also employ frequently to describe those in the margins in our own society, the people that do not fit in, the people that, for instance, I make this podcast for. It's for them. It's to reach the others. It's to tell them that I'm not alone. You're not alone. We come together and we discuss and we put things out there that maybe the dominant culture doesn't want to hear and doesn't want us to be able to say. So there are those others, and there are the others in us. And I think we need each other. They need us to fight for them, and in return, maybe they will fight for us as well, because it's an offering. So you have a quote in the beginning, the very, very start of your first book, 6 Ways, and you dedicate it to that which can't be sold, to that which can't be bought. For me, that was a very brave and beautiful statement, because we live in a culture where we know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So what is it right now? What is it that can't be sold? What is that for you?
To me, that is kind of who we are. To reference, the podcast title of yours is, it's who we are behind all the masks.
Yeah.
And that's the ones that we accept and the ones that we don't accept, and the ones that we're aware of and that we aren't aware of. And it's that idea of, to me, the point where I think magic shifted completely for me, and it's happened several times, it's not a singular thing, has been the point where I've gone to a place, whether that's in my home or in nature or wherever, what is a place of power where I have felt connection to the others, and have just been able to walk into that space and go, I am a mess. I'm not functional. I feel broken, and I need assistance. I need some help. And it's not human help that I'm looking for, because that is always kind of, the masks are always in place there. And to me, that's the sense that I have of my allies, is my allies are like the spirit, are the beings that most know who I am, and that I cannot deceive or I cannot lie to, and who are in some way served by me not giving in to all of that damage. So yeah, the things that can't be sold and the things that can't be bought are the things that can't be taken away, right? They can't even be given away, right? That's really kind of the secret behind the reclaiming right in 6 ways, is that it's like you think you gave it away, but you can't. It's not separable from who you really are.
I see.
And so, yeah, that's the most key thing to me, is going, there's all this stuff, like I want so many things in this world for myself, for my family, for my friends, for people I don't know that I just know are suffering. But underneath all of that is that kind of just true nature of being, which is probably a really unfashionable concept right now, you know? But I think it's really kind of the key to the whole thing, is just going, okay, I know that there's something inside me that isn't broken, that wants to be well, and that wants to be in community, and wants all my relationships to be symbiotic, right? And that's what that all refers to me.
That's really beautiful, and actually ties in to what I want to talk about next. I will quote you again. You write, "A modern bridge of concrete and steel cannot take us where we would like to and perhaps need to go. I'll take the dirt road, the spirit road with the coyotes and the ravens, as my people always have." So, dirt magic, let's talk about dirt magic a bit. What is the dirt road that you take?
The dirt road to me, or dirt sorcery as I talk about it, dirt magic, is just about accepting that we're animals. And we, the Muni Suzuki say in one of their songs, we're just fancy animals with hands, right? We have these opposable thumbs and these particular functions in the brain that allow us to do all sorts of things. But underneath all that stuff, and underneath all of this culture, and underneath all of the societal stuff and all the conditioning stuff, we're animals. And I don't think that there's any benefit at all, and I think there's huge detriment to not really respecting that and coming to terms with it, and realizing that we're not, there's ways that we are, I will say, but we're not really different than anything else here. We're not separate from anything else here. And so we're not trying to transmute ourselves into something that is beyond the flesh. We're not trying to get to the next world where everything is perfect. We're right here, right now. And that's the function of that dirt road, is going like, no, I have constant, this is absolute raven country. There's hundreds and hundreds that live on our property or right around it. And they're my people. I mean, that's there's no other way to say it. And I think it's funny. It's we have talked a little bit even before we started talking about, I have these connections to northern mythologies, and whether that's because part of my family comes from that or not, I don't know. But so being in this zone of ravens and coyotes, you could just feel it, like this is their place and I'm here, and to the fact that we build these crazy houses and roads and everything is an interference that they adapt to very nicely. Not everything does. And I think that that's one of the pieces of that, is there are the things that do fine, coyotes do fine, the ravens do fine, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't, that I would like to see us move into a way of doing things a little differently for that. And all of that kind of combines into that concept of dirt sorcery. And again, probably is why I don't have much of an understanding of kind of transcendental religion, or anything that's kind of that idea of transcending or moving beyond the body. Doesn't make any sense to me.
I know what you mean. Because at this point in time, I've noticed, especially here in London, in relevant circles, the so-called woke circles that we all know, it is very fashionable to say, oh, leave the body behind and this world is all an illusion, we don't need it, we're going to become pure spirit and we're going to become enlightened that way. And I always felt that was problematic because we're liminal beings in reality. And there is all the more power to us for being liminal beings, both spirit and matter, and to exercise the body, then you're not very different from the dominant religions that castize the body and human sexuality and human dirt, as you would say, to make it all ideal and pure spirit. Nature is not ideal. No. And we're part of nature, and it can be very cruel, as we can be very cruel. And this is why, personally, as yourself, I felt drawn to the Norse current that places this emphasis on thought and memory, Odin's ravens, and also its magic is one of weaving. It's not, which brings me to your later work, your most recent work, Weaving Fate. And a lot of that, feeds into this work of yours. You mentioned how we should deprogram from this conditioning, and you specifically write, as magicians, we seek to retrain the mind to understand which of what it perceives is real, relevant, and true. And the mind just ignores conflicting information until forced to face it. And much of the work of the illusionist, the conman and the spy, relies on this part of our nature, but our work as magical folk is to disrupt this. For me, this is crucial because to outsiders, okay, we are the outsiders, let's say, to most of people out there. When they hear magic, they think immediately of illusionism, number one, which you say our job is to disrupt this, and escapism, which is the exact opposite, of what you write about weaving. Weaving fate. It might seem like a contradiction in terms because fate, again, it has very negative connotations to the modern, or postmodern mind, that it's fatalism. Oh no, we're powerful, we're the authors of our own fate. And but that's not what those people, for instance, the Old Norse people, were on about when they were talking about the norms, and neither are you. So when you say weaving fate, what do you mean? How can we weave our fate?
As you know, because you've read the books, I have a great pleasure in defining magic over and over again in different ways, which is very intentional because people are often, this was worse when I was coming into it, really trying to define what it is so we can argue about it, right? And so to me, it's like if I can just continue dumping useful definitions versus true definitions, this opens it up to more and more people. So someone can go, oh, I've never thought of it that way. It's not me causing change in conformity with my will. Maybe it's falling in love. I thought that Weaving Fate was a really brilliant vision that came out. I've been reading the Norse stuff since I was a kid. And then at some point I realized that, again, what we have has mostly been written down by monks or by Snorri, who was Christian. And so we have to realize that even the core texts that are there are likely carrying overtones that are not original. And so being open to play, I really began going, well, what do I think these things then would have meant to somebody before this time? Not somebody trying to interpret it after that had fallen away to a good degree. And that idea of the Norns as weavers, as a description of kind of goddesses of time, right? Who are literally drawing threads through a tapestry that is all life, right? So the field again, the Norns are weaving the field is one way of viewing it that what I would say is probably very accurate to how I think they were probably viewed initially. And then realizing that that idea of fate as set comes from empire. If we look at where it is, it's a control tool. If we see it in places that have really rigid caste systems,
Yeah.
your fate is determined by what your father or mother did. Those are the only things available to you. And we still have this as like this constant overlay in our culture, all of this is, I bring it up there. Who do you think you are to think you could do something different? As if this is a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Because you're choosing then to say, no, I don't accept then that because I was born here and I'm standing here today, that therefore I have to end at the line that is currently drawn between those 2 points. I can get involved anywhere in there. And to me, that's the key behind weaving fate. And it really was one of the better, and it took me a long time to find that Jan Fries quote that opens the book. I'm like, where did that language come from? I knew I had read something that was very directly related to it. And then I finally was like, okay, it's got to be Fries, because Fries is the one that is the big influence on me. And I know how he speaks of these things. And so I started reading Sideways and Hellraiser again and came across it and went, okay, that's the thing. That was the key. And I just thought it was a beautiful way to explain what the work of magic really is, which is becoming hands-on and deeply involved with the currents of your life, visible and invisible, so that you get to have a say in how your life plays out in a way that's not currently acceptable.
It is, I really like this way of thinking, because as you mentioned, we tend to forget, like when we look back into old teachings and hunted down wisdom, that sometimes historically it comes from cultures that, as you say, they had caste systems that you couldn't escape from, and it was like convenient for the religion of the country to propagate this belief, because then the mass of the people would be more compliant. They would think, I'm down in the dirt, but I deserve this because my forefather did something in a past life, and now I'm powerless to change that, and I have to remain like in this position. It's really very convenient, and I think it's also convenient not only for the establishment, but in a way for the people themselves as well, because there is a vast majority of people that is not used to anymore assuming responsibility for their own lives. For instance, I was listening to a talk recently, and they were discussing, death and agency and all these kind of things. And there was one person that said that they would like to believe that after death there is nothing, because that is much easier, because that would take responsibility away from them. They wouldn't have to decide for anything, which obviously was causing them great anxiety. They would rather not have this at all. And this obviously, it's a very opposite philosophy from weaving and from magic, because magic, maybe, it has the stigma on it of escapism, but what you write about, and most of the other writers in this field also propagate, is responsibility. It's something that very few associate with magic, but it is the ultimate act of responsibility to create a map of reality on your own, not based on anybody else. Nobody can absolve you from this. Nobody can forgive you, and nobody can give you guidelines and commandments as to how you're gonna live. It's all on you. I think that's a really important remark that you made there.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing to me, is it's like, that's a really hard choice. I was reading an interesting article about kind of the rise of authoritarianism in the world right now. And it is a really difficult thing, if you're wired like I am, to see that as attractive. Like, okay, you would rather be secure than be free.
Yeah.
Right? And this is, to me, a very counter concept to magic. Because magic is saying, I want to be fully engaged. I want to have the option to be fully engaged. I want to be able to make terrible mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want somebody saying I can't do that. I don't want any part of my mind saying you shouldn't do that because it's not the sure thing, because there's no sure thing anyway, right? It's illusion. It's like we're gambling anyway. One of my favorite songwriters is a guy named Danny Schmidt, and he says in one of his songs, he says, it's a song called This Too Shall Pass, and it goes, things change fast, and this too shall pass. You better carve it on your forehead or tattoo it on your ass, because who can tell when the clock strikes 12 if today becomes tomorrow or if it's all just gone to hell. And to me, that's this beautiful explanation of being alive, right? And you go, you don't know. You could do everything right. And as many people found during the various recessions and what's going on now, you could have built the perfect career. You could have done everything you were supposed to with your money. And now you have nothing. Mm-hmm. And this has always been true. You know, if we think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors, you're running through the woods, you take a wrong step, you break a leg, and you're done. Mm-hmm. This is always true. And yet this illusion of safety and this illusion of security and all of the various things, whether they're religious structures or political structures or tribal structures that say, we can take that all away and you'll just be fine. We have to know that that's not true, because no one can offer that. Yeah. And so you have to be comfortable getting in the driver's seat and saying, okay, I'm going to do what makes sense to me, and I don't know that it's going to work out. And I think we've lost that.
What you were saying reminded me of the rune Pertho, the rune of chance, gambling, you know, if the baby comes tomorrow. Anyway, it's all a game of chance, so at least you want to be the one, you know, throwing the dice instead of having somebody else do that for you. And like
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking, you know, one of the quotes that didn't make it into the book was from a Southern rock song from the 70s from this band called Molly Hatchet that didn't do a lot of good songs, but they did some good ones. And one of the lines in their big hit says, you know, I don't know about yourself or what you plan to be, but when you gamble with your time, you choose your destiny. Right? And you go, well, that's some fucking dudes from Alabama or something that are just basically partiers trying to sound cool, probably. But they're also onto something there that you do. It's that game of, it's the whole idea of whether it's runes or whether it's cards, either viewed as, you know, the traditional view is that these are divinatory systems that allow you to see what's coming so you can change your path. Mm-hmm. They're not, you don't do it just so you can see if you're fucked.
Totally. Right? Outcome, oh, this came up, so this is it. There is no other choice, and yeah, I can just throw you back.
And so again, if you take that idea with and I think this is what that figure of Odin that we get through the Havamal and things like that really is it's this archetypal being who said, I'm going to get my hands totally dirty. I'm going to go all the way down to the roots of the tree and see what I can do. Because I think I can do something that's of value based on my own values, not based on anything else. And I think that that's the key to magic.
I really love how you mentioned that, how you mentioned Odin, his sacrifice on the tree, and Havamal in particular, because Havamal has for me, it's very different for every other religious, I'm not going to call it religious, this kind of text, but you know what I mean. Everything else is about hunting you down, how to live. But the Havamal comes and it is just, you know, it sounds like the advice of your father or your grandfather, which is actually what it is. It tells you, I gained this wisdom, I went through this and this and this, I give it to you. But it's up to you to judge what you're going to do with it, and even what I mean, because a lot of the stanzas in the Havamal, they're double entendre. They're a bit like, you know, how in Greece, the Pythoness of Apollo would give out her prophecies. it was never clear what she meant. It could be either way, and you had to choose which way to go. And there is a lesson in this, an implicit lesson. And also I got the sacrifice on the tree. You actually gave me a very important insight with your work, because I always saw this, myself to myself. I sacrifice myself to myself, that Odin says on the tree, as he sacrifices his lower kind of self to gain the higher self, so himself to himself. But you say it's sacrificing himself also to the tree, to the spirit of the tree, and so to nature, so to the field, which is not separate from him. It is the exact same, and this is a very big lesson. And
that was a huge thing for me. I don't remember. I didn't have that for a long time, and one day I think I was riding my bike and I was thinking about that. And it just hit me. I'm like, oh, wait a second. He's talking about what he did on the tree. Yeah. So he's clearly stating that he's the tree, that this happened. And to me, it made that thing, because you go, of course, because that's that process, right? Whether we view it in pretty much all of the shamanic traditions that are out there. And again, I know that's not a popular word to use as a general term, but we don't have a better one. So understand I'm using it as a general term, though I know that that's a specific culture that's a word from. This is that process of like, what is it? I can't remember what the term is, sitting out, right?
Yes.
In Northern tradition. Yeah. Is you go and you just wait. And you basically go, I don't know what's going on right now, or I have questions. And you wait. And we see this in a bunch of different Native American tribal cultures you go outside and you just wait. And I think that this is a discussion of these same processes of you have to be willing to kind of abandon yourself to the field and abandon your sense of yourself to the field and go, okay, I'm aware that this sense of self is a construct and it's not really what I am. It's who I'm comfortable thinking I am. And if I can let go of that, there are things I can learn. And it's also, I think, when we look at some of the names around Odin and stuff, there's this kind of views of madness or ecstatic states. And one of the translations that a friend of mine who was a Norse scholar, this was in the 90s, said was that there were basically versions that were very similar to like father of lies and father of misery. And that he really took these as being, because it's so hard to do, like the lie is the lie you tell yourself, and the misery is that thing that is kind of put on you to realize, are you comfortable staying within that? And so that's this horrible burden until you go, okay, I would rather, again, know who I am, know what I am, and have freedom than I would be comfortable. Mm-hmm. Because we are comfortable even with kind of the terrible kind of self-denigration and self-abuse we heap on ourselves. We know it, and there's comfort in what we know. And so to me, that figure of Odin or Woden, it's very interesting to me because there's such a weird, like there's a, and I'm sure that there's different faces, I think, of any spirit that different people are going to see. I've never even hit a vague encounter of Odin as kind of a war god. Mm-hmm. I definitely hit him as a death spirit.
Same, yeah.
And I definitely hit him as this transformer spirit and kind of this primal sorcerer shaman spirit of going, no, there's something else. And I'm going after that something else, even though I know it's dangerous and I know that there will be loss for going after it, but the loss to be incurred going after it is worth it because of what I might gain. Mm-hmm. You know, so I see all that side so much.
Yeah, and Odin, I mean, 8-legged horse. What else is 8-legged? A spider. Mm-hmm. The spider is the one that travels on the web. He's the one that travels on the web of the world. And it might have been that while he was going through his ordeal on the tree, he actually saw a spider's web and he saw the runes there, you know?
Absolutely, I love that.
Small things. So
I love that.
yeah, it ties in to everything that you
And I,
write. And yeah, Father of Lies, the breaking down of delusion. You speak a lot about delusion in your work, in the sense, not the way that a pragmatist, a realist would call a person like you and me delusional.
right, absolutely.
But
It's
in
mutual, so
relation,
it's okay.
yeah, in relation to how people like to deceive themselves, sit on themselves, not facing the mirror, basically what you said before, what cannot be sold, what cannot be bought. You'd rather to be comfortable, the average person would like to sell that, actually, but with that selling out, there comes a delusion, because you're not able to look in the mirror anymore when you wake up, and that is very important. So maybe.
And I think it's such an interesting thing. I had an experience with datura when I was young, and I do not recommend it to anyone because it's a neurotoxin. But it was extremely unpleasant. But one of the things that was very freeing about it was that I got to see. There's a way that on some psychedelic drugs, you're tripping. And so no matter how terrifying it gets, when you're coming out of it, you're aware that you were under the influence of something that was helping you have these visions, right? And my experience with datura was that it was totally unlike that, and partially because it lasted so long. It was a full week of this in very large periods of time. I didn't know I was experiencing these delusions and hallucinations, whatever you want to call them. And so during the periods where I was aware that maybe the events of the last 3 days had only been the events of the last couple of hours, but I would never know. Like it totally broke time during that period. And it very much broke my sense of self. Like I had to accept that my mind was capable, with a little bit of help, to generate this vast range of visual and tactile and olfactory and kind of full sensory immersion. And I think that was the first time I really realized, like, okay, this is not different than what I'm doing all the time. It's just, there's an unusual edge to it that makes it very hard to cope with. But I'm doing this conversion in my neurology from information from inside outside, and I'm forming these belief structures or images or sensorial structures. And again, it tied into that thing where you went, okay, so myself then is incredibly fragile because I spent a week not being that person, and really having to kind of check in for weeks after that. Like, do I think that's done now? And I had another on a different, I was a non-safe psychonaut when I was a kid. But I had another one where I like really literally learned, I lost the ability to speak completely. And for several days. And the way that my mind was working as a result of this particular concoction that I'd taken, it really broke all of the normal patterning that I had. And again, it was really unpleasant and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but there was a great benefit to me too, because I could again see like, okay, there's a way that to myself now I'm insane. I'm not forming anything like logical conclusions. I'm not experiencing things accurately compared to what I knew. I've lost the ability to use language. Okay, so what happens now? And I think that was a huge benefit to me to have that experience, though it was terrifying. Again, because it opened up like, things are not necessarily how I think they are. The rules that I think apply to my own perception, so this controls all of the perceptions of humans and the world we build and all of the stories we agree on, whether tacitly or overtly, are equally kind of synthetic. They're equally constructed. And that ties into that deprogramming thing that we were talking about earlier, right? And so there's this great power, and this is again something that I see very strongly in that Odin figure, is that I really see that as this aggregate story of someone who went, things aren't how I've been told. And I'm going to find out how they really are for me. I'm not even going to assume they're this way for anybody else, but for me, what are the rules, right? What are the laws? And what's available to someone who's able to make that decision to dive into those very uncomfortable states? And again, I'm not suggesting the drug method at all. I have never gone back to either of those things because they were both so, but it was more of an example of having that experience that I've also had sitting out. If you go out into the woods and just hang out, there's a point where so much stuff falls away that you go, okay, there's a lot that I thought about what I needed or about who I was that isn't really anything more than a habit or a convenience, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that about your psychedelic experiences, and because it is, I agree with you, it is something that is very useful in the programming, and there are people who have been healed and transformed by it. And yeah, obviously we find it in shamanic cultures. Perhaps we find it in the myth of Odin as well. Maybe, you know, he had ingested something while undergoing his ordeal. Another thing that I have noticed though around these things, and it is why I wouldn't go that way either or recommend them, is not so much the toxicity of the substances themselves, or like the consequences. It's another type of consequence that I see in this community, the psychedelic community. I've been to a lot of, let's say, workshops with shamans, with like in lectures where they were discussing altered states, a lot of this kind of stuff. And I saw an overemphasis on this factor to the detriment of others, to the point that it was becoming disempowering for the human being, as if you were outsourcing your capacity to have a transcendental experience or an altered state to the substance. And I don't think this is, for instance, none of them, only one actually, mentioned art as an altered state.
Right.
There was all this emphasis on this substance and that substance and this and that, and that art nowhere, which comes from your soul own capacity as a human, from the combination of your senses, your spirit, and your mind and your feelings. And I was really sad by that because of that. Because I am a writer personally. I've been writing since I was very young. I'm not a published one, but okay, that will come as well at some point. And so I was constantly in what I perceive as the definition of an altered state. Because when you write, you are at least two people. One that is has to be detached, has to be the observer, who describe all these kind of things, analyze. And then you have to be at the same time somebody, an empty vessel that can be filled with the experiences of everybody else, feel everybody else to their very core. Even when you write about a villain, you even have to become that. If you are, let's say, a crime writer, for instance. So that is at least, you're at least two people at the same time, if not many, many more. And you operate on many different levels of reality at the same time. You're in a room, you write, there are things going on around you, and at the same time you are, I don't know, in Tuonela or wherever you want to be. So, and that you do on your own. You channel, you empty yourself, you become a vessel, and at the same time you're an agent, at the same time you're a will. And this is a very beautiful thing, and it's not something limited to writers, obviously. Austin Osman Spare, when he was painting, he was doing the same thing. Musicians, they do this. What is more psychedelic than music? Or more entheogenic than music? So I find this overemphasis on the substances that pervades the current culture, and rather counterculture, a bit problematic because of this this feeling that for me it is disempowering if you think like that. If you think that, for instance, I had people tell me, because I was always somebody who was able to have visions, you know, and sayings that are like, I never took anything, but I had visions of Odin or, you know, other spirits. And they would tell me, oh, that's because you're special, but we can't do that. And that's why we need the substance. That's not true. Like, if you tell yourself, I can't do that, then yeah, you won't be able to do it if you don't believe in yourself. So that's something that I wanted to put out there because it troubles me when I encounter this kind of...
I think it's a very useful point. I mean, I was certainly, when I started doing kind of psychedelic experimentation, mainly from like 14 to about 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that got me to walk away from it was, I just am not a vision person in that state. So I wasn't, with the exception of things that I really didn't want to do again, I didn't actually get visions for the most part. And also because of that, it's like you go, okay, this is in the neurology to have these experiences. And so we can use keys to open them up, or we can accept that it goes on, even if it's not as technicolor as we would like, you know, in my case. But I think, and I totally get the art thing. I mean, that's why I was kind of immersed in Crowley as the first thing that I kind of like dug into. Like I knew there were things there that I needed to read, but I never liked him. I never had the sense like this guy's right or something.
Resonance with that.
Yeah, I never had resonance there. And then I came across Austin Spare through the Temple of Psychic Youth. And I had the reverse experience. Like, okay, this guy's a madman. I don't know what he's talking about in his books, but I can tell that we are connected to the same current because of his art and because of what he was writing. There was an actual visionary effect from reading his work that there was no benefit to try and take it apart to understand specifically what every sentence meant, which I know people who have tried to do with him. But if I played with his writing, if I played with his art, and now I have, that's why I was lighting incense, because we brought him up, and I have a little shrine to him over here. That he was the one that, to me, was like the gateway to a different take on magic, because it wasn't the neo-pagan thing. And again, I have nothing against any of these things. I have beautiful friends that are involved in all that stuff. It's just about what speaks to me. And Spare was the first one that did that. He was like, it's like I knew him when I came across his work. There was a way that he and I were of the same kind of lineage of magic or something. And he's someone that I feel was very much, I think he was mainly just transmitting through his art constantly. And that's a beautiful gift that I think most of us have someplace we do it, even if we don't view it as art. There's a lot of the things that are traditionally women's work that I see this as being incredibly present in, though it's totally dishonored now, because it's not, it's not conducive to capital, essentially. I see it in all of the kind of crafts. So the metalwork that I did was very much a connection to that. Like people ask a lot of, I get kind of regular questions from people going, what was the process of the magical aspects of making jewelry? And it's like the making jewelry, the way that I did it was the magical aspects of making jewelry. Because people are like, well, how are you doing the consecrations? How are you doing the ritual? It's like,
so you started making jewelry because of magic, as an aspect of your magic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an outflowing of that. And so there's nothing really that has to happen in that way, except respecting it and getting out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's an interesting thing that a lot of folks that do art or music or write talk about, which is that process that a lot of it is about getting out of the way, so that you can be kind of filled with whatever is trying to come through. And that's, I think that that ties in again to all of these kind of views of magic that we're talking about. Is it's not about how hard you can stabilize yourself, right? That kind of will-centered view of magic, which I don't hold, to how far can you get out of the way so you can experience what's actually present, and then come up with a way that works for you to exist in that space.
Between possession and detachment, but it's like working that fine line. Yeah,
Yes.
and it's also why I said we have a very similar path we've walked in this field. Myself as well, I started with ceremonial magic and Crowley, because in Greece when I was younger, and like I started when I was 14 being interested in this thing, so it's like almost 20 years now that I've been involved. And in Greece there isn't much. We only had one occult bookstore, if even that, and what it had was ceremonial magic, the Golden Dawn and the Crowley stuff, and that's what I started with. But and also there was the Mother Goddess Starhawk tradition, which I liked more because she's a beautiful writer.
She's a beautiful writer.
Yeah.
And a really nice person. I've met her a few times. She's great.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing. It's another person that I wanted to host here at some point, because this is pure poetry and also a real warrior of light. But at the same time, it wasn't. None of these traditions was exactly doing it for me. And then I discovered Jan Fries, I discovered Jason Miller, and Austin Spare was very important to me because I saw him actually as a contrast to Crowley, as you said as well, because Crowley was all about the will. But there are also, because we live in a web, there are also all these other wills, and there will always be something that you cannot change, and you have to work to go around that monolith, as you would say, and find other ways. And I think he was too forthright and too dominant sometimes, and this is why, and also very heavily putting emphasis on substances rather than being intoxicated by your own vision, like Spare was doing. So I think also that's maybe why there is this misperception around the magical community that is like, oh, do what you will. It means you do whatever and you don't care about anything, and the consequences. And it's actually very different than that. It's a different kind of will that we're seeking, not to do whatever we want, but finding out what our true calling is. And then if you belong in a tradition like yours, then also taking into account all this web around you and navigating through this. Speaking of like writing and books, I really want to talk about the Black Book. That is a big part of your second book, Weaving Fate, which has this beautiful title. I have it here, this hypersigils, changing the past and telling true lies. This is quite a title, isn't it? Yes, telling true lies. So there are quite a few quotes that I have highlighted from this book, like, I invoke different points of view into myself via sorcery. Magic as literature shouldn't be discarded, and there are many ways to write a hypersigil, including fiction, writing, art, and film. You have already gone into this in your book. And one of the magical techniques that you give is writing this Black Book. What is this Black Book?
So the Black Book is what I called originally, when I first came up with it, I called it the False Journal. And I think that that's a very easy to understand term. And so it's a journal that you do things to before you begin, and then after you begin, to consecrate it as a magical being, essentially, magical creature. And then in the False Journal, you journal the life you would prefer to be living, as if you are living it. So it's not, I want this. I want to, talk to Lena today and have this conversation with her about all these things. Instead, you would say, if this hadn't happened and you wanted it to, you go, yesterday, I had this fabulous conversation with Elena about magic and Spare and Freeze and all of these things. And you really kind of dive into all of the emotional and feeling-based aspects of it as being the primary thing. You want to really feel it more than you're looking for any kind of precision in the event. You're looking for, if you had the perfect conversation, what would that feel like if you were writing about it that night or the next day? And so the Black Book is a magical tool to bring about these states and these experiences through this false journal.
So, which is not really false, is it? Because it contains who you truly are, who you truly want to be. Your
It's
idea
absolutely.
is like a state, so maybe that is more real. This is where the true lies.
I think that that's the thing that's the key. If there's a key to it, is that, and why it's, I tell people, like, do it for like 6 months before you give up on it, because it'll take a very long time for some people to get really comfortable, or hit a week. Sometimes it's just, you'll hit a week where you can really go for it, and you really feel it, and you're really experiencing it, and it's like you're really writing about the day with your kind of, your mind begins to accept that there's two levels of reality that you're interacting with. And when that happens, it shows you so much what you're looking for that I've never found another form of magic that does that. That there's a way that you go, I don't give a fuck about what the job is, or what the house is, or what my partner is in specific, but I want it to feel like this. I want to feel like this within that. And it's an incredibly clear transmission in my mind to the field and the others that is very hard to get to any other way.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's a practice that it's pure weaving, because that's what you do. You weave what you want, like your fate on paper, and you visualize it as you do that, and you feel it. So yeah, it is pure fiction writing, but is it fiction? You know, this is where the line gets blurred. Is fiction ever fiction, or is it magic?
Right.
You know, film, art, as you mentioned, all these, aren't they hypersigils? Don't they channel something, put out something, you know? And at the same time, this also brings the idea of contagion in, a good word now with everything that we're going through with COVID. Can you talk to me a bit about contagion? Because as we are weaving, and we put out our own like magic to deprogram, to shut out the psychic sensor, there are obviously those who very much want the psychic sensor to be there, and they do their own magic. And I think we can do that, like we can see that in society. Can you give me some examples of how you perceive magic outside in the world that postulates as not magic, but it is?
Yeah, so that idea of, for folk, most people probably have run across it somewhere, but if they're practicing again on a ceremonial side, they may not have hit it as much that if they came from a folk magic idea. That the idea of contagion is that things that influence each other, that touch each other, continue to influence each other after that touching point is done, unless something causes it to break the connection. And a lot of times things just kind of decay naturally, but so contagion is the points where that natural decay hasn't happened. And it's very much like contracting a virus, right? So if I am exposed to that thing, I breathe it in or get bloodborne pathogen or whatever, the exposure has occurred and there are physiological changes that are occurring, even if I'm unaware of them, right? And even if I'm unaware of the cause. And perhaps, like with the COVID thing, perhaps I'm someone that is totally asymptomatic. I don't get anything, but it's still doing its thing. It's in my body, it's doing its thing. So if we view that on a magical sense, we could kind of view that this is happening within our own kind of magical self, has expanded a bit into our ecosystem, which is kind of the space around us that I think of, which is where our allies hang out and our personal power interacts with the field. It's kind of useful to me to view that I'm in kind of not a bubble, but that there's an ecosystem that I'm a part of that extends beyond me, and that contagion affects everything there. And so where I got interested in the contagion question that I deal with in Weaving Fate is the idea of kind of contagion of ideas and then cultural contagion. So again, if we go to a really extreme example and we look at like a culture that has a fully locked down caste system, that caste system is like a viral entity that is fully infecting the entire culture. Not saying it's always bad, but it's always active. And so if we accept that kind of a view, and we can pull it out of that specific culture to maybe more like what we see in the West now, we go, if you were brought up believing that you will never be anything, and you accept that, that's contagion. It's not reality, because we see all the time that there are people who just walk outside of that story, right? And so there's this weird kind of game that we have to go, okay, some pieces of the culture are going to affect different members of that culture differently. And so we see people who, for whatever reason, are asymptomatic. So you go, yeah, they were treated like shit. They were abused. They were beat down. They were from the wrong class. They were from a minority contingent of the culture in some sense. And therefore they should not be able to achieve. That's the story. That's the contagion. That's the virus. And so a lot of what I talk about is deprogramming work, and a lot of the work that goes on in Weaving Fate is about going, which pieces of these kind of conceptual influences are actually working against me. And so it's a very introspective question and can take a lot of work. And which do I not really have to worry about right now, because I'm asymptomatic. I should perhaps have not ended up with the headspace that I do about these things, or these feelings that I do. And so then it becomes a game of, how do we change that? How do we antidote that virus? How do we antidote the fact that maybe I think I'm not meant to be happy? Mm-hmm. Or that I have all sorts of constraints about the things that I could do in my life. Not even what I should do in my life, but possibility. What are the things that I believe are impossible? The things that I talk about in Weaving Fate is all the places. The best way to do it is if you make a note to yourself to always note anytime you think or say, I could never do that. That's huge keys in. Like you go, okay. Where you just go, that's not me. I would never do that. You go, okay, let's look at that. Is that really real? Is there a scenario where you would? Why do you think you wouldn't? Why do you think that couldn't happen? What's the story behind that? What's the narrative behind that? Did somebody tell you that? Is somebody telling you that? And that could be, the vast world of marketing and advertising. Why do people want what they think they want, when usually that's not the thing that would actually make them happy? I talk about it in the book, is like, it's a very common thing to go, I want to be rich and famous. But that's usually not really the thing that we're after. It's like a stand-in or a proxy. And so you have to get beyond that and go, what is the thing how would I feel? What is that feeling sense I get from the concept of being wealthy, of being famous, of being accepted in some way, or being not constrained in some way? What is that level there? And is that something that makes more sense to be working towards? And what are those kind of blockages that are keeping me from that, or from considering it a possibility more than even keeping you from it? Because that's the biggest issue, I think, is that we don't think. There's lots of stuff we just write off, that we go, there's no way I could do that.
Yeah, it's what you speak of, like when you say fear as a catalyst, that we have to use our fear as a catalyst, which is no easy feat to do in this kind of world, because it invests so much energy, especially now with the new media, the social media, this vast echo chambers, in my opinion. I can't stand them, really, sorry. where they, like I said, they invest so much energy in making people feel inadequate and fearful. And fear is the mind killer, to paraphrase Dune. So then that's it. Once you have the fear inside you and the imposter syndrome and the seeing yourself as inadequate and comparing, contrasting with things that were not, they weren't born in you. They were not part of you in the first place. They're implanted there. So that's contagion, isn't it? And it comes like from everywhere.
There's a guy that is incredibly polarizing. That's, I think, very fascinating. Even if you are uncomfortable with him, I think he's really worth looking at. Named David Goggins, who was a Navy SEAL and became an ultra distance runner. So 100, 150 mile races through the desert, things like that, foot races. And Goggins, well, David Goggins, there's two different versions of him, and it's relevant to magic here. He was raised in an incredibly abusive situation. He was treated very poorly as the only person of color in his town, pretty much. And he took it on. He absolutely just sucked all that stuff in, and it formed his view of himself. And he hit a point where he just couldn't do it anymore and began trying to kind of claw his way out of this thing. And he basically saw like a documentary on the Navy SEALs kind of in-doc training, the training thing that gets you in. And he went, okay, that is the furthest thing from me, and I want that. It's not like he wanted to be career military from patriotism or anything else. He was like, that is just the guy I am not, and I want to be that guy. And through basically just like really savage self-reflection, there's no kind approach to Goggins' thing, and this is why he's so polarizing. That for him, he realized like his fear was his greatest tool, and his anger was his greatest tool. This is not saying this is the best tool. This is just the one he used. And so through the process of becoming a Navy SEAL, he basically generated an alter ego who was just Goggins. And Goggins' game, going through this all this stuff in the SEALs, was he came up with was taking souls. This is his language. It's fascinating as a magician to look into his stuff. And so to him,
sorry to interrupt you, just to understand. This is something that he generated on his own. It wasn't part of any programming that he underwent.
No, he was a wreck. He was self-professed a total wreck. And so he basically decided that Goggins, this alter ego, his thing was that Goggins couldn't be broken. Like, it didn't matter. Like, Goggins didn't stop. He didn't care if he broke himself. That was not even on the plate. It's just like, you can't hurt me. And that was his whole idea going through when he finally made it through after like 3 tries, getting through the Navy SEALs kind of BUDS program where they basically get everybody to cave. He did it the last time by coming up with this concept. He's like, okay, I know everybody that's running me through this did this, and that it sucked really badly for them, and that they know it sucks really badly for everybody going through, and that most of us are going to break. He says, so I am going to be the guy that is looking straight at them and telling them, you can't break me. Throw everything at me. Do everything. So he was not being compliant. He wasn't trying to minimize the damage, any of that. And he basically created this self that was unwilling to give up, right? This is a really interesting magical process, and it's very disturbing to a lot of people because they view it as this super macho thing if they really don't dig into his story. And it really wasn't. It's just that the only tool that he was able to latch onto was basically fear of being the person he didn't want to be and anger. And he learned how to direct those into a particular kind of power, right? To me, it's directly magic. So he would, I'm sure, not consider it so at all. And when there's a Rich Roll podcast, and I don't like a lot of Rich's stuff just because his guest choice is not who I would, but he has a fairly recent podcast with a neuroscientist named Andrea Huberman. And Huberman is really interesting because he's looking at what is the brain chemistry of a lot of these changes that go on. What is the brain chemistry that causes us to stay on the tracks, to use the language of Weaving Fate? What is the brain chemistry that allows us to go, no, I'm not doing this, even though the choice to not do it is incredibly uncomfortable, right? And he talks about Goggins in this way, that Goggins is a very interesting case because he was able to use what would generally be thought of as really negative emotions to produce positive change. You know, it's a very interesting process. But so that where it's interesting, I think, is that Goggins became really clear that he was under the influence of contagion. He's like, this is story. This is narrative that I have bought from the people who raised me and the kids that I grew up with in town and the way I was treated in school. I bought this whole story. And the only way I'm going to get out of it is to write a different one. And that's where I think he's so brilliant, is he went, no, I'm going to create that version, that character that cannot be broken. Wow. And it's a very harsh version of it, but I think it's an interesting look at that that would make sense to a lot of folks that may have trouble kind of picturing this stuff.
It's a very, very interesting story, fascinating. I didn't know about this. I'm going to look into it more. Because, I understand it might be disturbing, maybe ideologically. Obviously, it's off-putting for many people. But at the same time, you can take lessons from everything. And sometimes it's the people that it's these edges, that bring you.
And I think it ties into that thing that there's not any one way to go either, right? That if we become aware that we're not fully living an authentic experience, that my approach is not necessarily going to be the one that gets everybody to do that. I'm not attached to that idea at all. It wouldn't make any sense to me. Some folks are going to find different ways to do it or different stories that do it. But again, if we kind of tie it back to that narrative concept and to, if we look at the function of mythology, a lot of mythologies are giving you different stories about how people made these shifts.
Different versions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So since we're talking about narrative and changing the narrative and going off tracks, I wanted to talk a bit about the corridor. Because, changing the past, how do you use this corridor that you have invented in your practice to change the impossible? Most people, when they read this, are like, how can you change the past? It's something that has already happened. It is the one thing that you cannot change. So let's discuss a bit how you can change that.
So the idea behind the corridor is that it's just a hallway of endless doors that you're walking down. And as you pass the doors, you're basically looking for the door that is kind of speaking to you. And you can just force it if it doesn't work, but give it some time because it usually actually will open. One will usually show up for you. And what you're looking for initially is a specific point in time where you know you took on trauma. Or where a point where a limit was kind of set on you that you believe might still be a driver in your life. And you go into these, you open the door and go in and you modify the events there. Basically changing the memory of what went down to one that would serve you better. Interestingly, there's a couple of things that I found out again through that Andrea Huberman guy that I mentioned, which is there's a thing that we do when we walk or when we run or when we're like on a bicycle, but you have to be, in my experience with this, it's something that I found distance running and riding and walking. What they call it I'm not sure whether this is a psychological thing or whether it's a neuroscience thing, is they call it optic flow. And it's the flow of things past your vision. And there's this slight motion back and forth that you're doing with your eyes to notice what's on either side of you as you walk or ride or run. right? And this is the root of a therapy process called EMDR, right? This is like, it's eye motion something. But anyway, where they're having you track, the therapist is having you track a point in front of you as they're working through trauma. So this is an interesting thing. So the corridor process of visualizing that corridor, I believe, triggers this optic flow, which I did not know anything about when I started using this. What I believe happens with this corridor work, and a friend of mine that knows more about the neuroscience than I do says, we think we remember the actual event that happened in the past each time we recall it, but we actually remember the last time we remembered it. That's the most recent memory. And so what I think is happening in the corridor is we're changing that most recent memory to be something different. And so the effect that that event has on us is changed. And so it's a very useful way of kind of destroying the traction that these events have on us and allowing us to move forward.
Yeah, the corridor was one of my favorite parts in your work, and it's actually, in a sense, it's how I came to your work. It's strange. I'm gonna share this story because it's interesting, like in the way how these things develop. So it was a time when I was watching this Netflix TV series from Germany called Dark, which involves time travel. And time travel, interestingly, I didn't know this at the time, but the main character, it's not time travel in the sci-fi like way that we are used to. It's more, it focuses on the psychological aspect, how this character wants to go back into the past to change specific, like himself. Future versions of himself go back to the past self and they interact. So this paradox, you don't have to meet yourself. It's not what's happening there. It's very much what's happening in your practice, where you send your future self to the past to consult, to help your younger self. So that series was all about that. And it put me into, and he does this through a corridor. There is a corridor in a cave, and there are these branches. And
cool. I'll have to watch this.
Yes, you really do have to watch this. You would find a lot of stuff there. So I was thinking a lot about time and time travel. It put me in this state where I was looking back at videos on YouTube of my life in Greece. I was born in late 80s, 87. So I grew up in the 90s, very different world than today. And I was watching all these videos, of TV from back then, from Greece. The advertisements that we had, like the shows that we watched, how we dressed, how we lived. And I felt I had this odd sense of being suddenly in the wrong timeline. And it's not the first time that I feel this. Like I've been feeling this since approximately like 2012. And if I really look into it, this feeling of disassociation with my previous timeline, it came with the introduction of the smartphone into my life. Because these things are magic, right? They change the way that your mind is programmed, the way that your energy is, you are literally on another timeline. And I even ended up going online and typing sense of having switched timelines to see if there was anybody else who had explored this. And I ended up finding this one thread on Reddit where people were describing the exact same sensations as myself. And a lot of them were pointing to technology as the source of this influx of new technologies that are, it's like a cataclysm. It has changed everything. It is as if it put a stop to our previous life, and not a positive one, exactly. And yeah, a lot of these people were speaking about wanting to go back and having experiences of time traveling in their dreams, changing the past, and then I typed changing the past. And I came across your book after a series of searches. And I thought to myself, I looked at the title, I found out it was written by somebody in this field that I'm interested in, that I've read so many books in, and was influenced by the same people that I was influenced, and he was offering solutions to what I was feeling, exactly that. I also felt many times that I want to go back to the past, to hug my past self and tell them it's gonna be okay, because I went through a lot when I was a kid. I was very much bullied, I had health issues, I was bullied because of those physical health issues I couldn't do anything about. And that did a lot of damage to me. And I really wanted to go back to that person. And it's funny how these things work, because as a child, at some point, I had this vision, call it what you will, of my future self that interestingly looked exactly as I looked in my 20s. I really came to look like that. That hug me and tell me, it's gonna be okay. None of this is real. You're gonna be me one day. And I didn't believe her at the time. I was like, no, how can I be you? There is no way. And then when I started with the practices in your book, I said to myself, well, maybe I did. Maybe what I experienced then is what I'm doing now. Maybe the self I saw back then is the one I'm sending back now. I don't know, I thought
That's
I would
fantastic.
say this because I think, it works. For me, it totally works. So
That's fantastic.
yeah.
It is very interesting, and it's interesting that you brought up the smartphone thing, because I do believe that you're onto something there, though I would timeline it a little differently, and it could be because of where I grew up and when. So around, I want to say around 92, I left San Francisco and I was living in the Lower Haight, which was a total freak scene and filled with artists and sex workers and magicians and junkies and musicians and tons of magicians and pagans of all sorts that were all kind of intermingling. It's very close to the Castro, so very heavily queer. It was just a wild and fabulous time there. And I went to New Orleans, traveled around, and when I came back, people were talking about Photoshop. This was totally new. Like, this was like the timing may be slightly off, but year-wise, and it could be that Photoshop wasn't the first thing, but that was what I noticed. But anyway, I had left, and when I came back a couple of years later, there was this discussion about computers. And so this was like, it was weird. Like, we would be in bars talking about Austin Spare and the Swans or Sonic Youth or different bands or Diamanda Galas and the ritual aspects of that stuff. Those were the bar conversations among my peers, right? And I come back and everybody's talking about computers. And I kept leaving the city in the following 10 years or so. And every time I would come back, this was more and more present. So now everybody that I knew was involved in .com startups, all of this. I ended up working for an animation studio there. But it was really clear to me, like, there had been this radical shift from traditional arts, music, kind of spiritual exploration into this, what we would think of as kind of the early days of the world that we're in now, right? And I never liked it. I was never comfortable in San Francisco after that point. Like, after that first time I left, like, it was like something had happened that I was not down with. And I am fully tech guy at this point. I mean, I am reliant on my computer and all of that. But I didn't get a smartphone until about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
And I think that they're outright evil at this point. One of the things that was so interesting listening to that guy, Andrea Huberman, on Rich Roll, and there's another video, and I'll get you a link to the other one because I can't remember who he's talking to, is as he was describing what they're doing in his lab at Stanford around kind of brain science, neuroscience, visual, they're working on bringing back vision to the blind in many cases, and this is one of his focuses, and particularly that function of optic flow, right? Where you're walking or you're riding a bike or a horse or you're running. our entire history was saturated with this locomotive optic flow. And now, for almost everyone, it's gone. We don't have it at all. Like the runners and the cyclists and the walkers have it, if they're not on their smartphone while they're doing it. And instead what we have is this very static vision that keeps us in, which also means that if what Huberman is saying is that optic flow and its part of it is it literally what it's doing is, he thinks, is that function of that continuous gaze change laterally from right to left and back and forth as you're moving through space is what allows you to move beyond events that happened to you. And this is why they can use it in therapy, right? So if we then lock everything down to screens, if we lock everything into cars, if we lock it into that, it has made me wonder, and I just found him, so he's very much on my mind, how much of that is the kind of weirdness that I think has happened in the last 30 years now with the rise of kind of the computers and the internet. And this is not to say that there's not a ton of good, like I get to talk to you, and I get to self-publish books now and get them out to people all over the world. But there is a way that I think it's accelerated kind of our dysfunction. To me, it's almost like it is. It's almost like it's like a stopping point of evolution. It's like people go, well, this is the evolution. You go, no, because you're an animal. Even if you implant that into an animal, it's not the same. You're created to be experiencing all of these things as passing. You're supposed to experience the seasons in the flesh. You're not supposed to be outside of that. And so it's very weird now with the pandemic kind of forcing people home. I throw all of this together and I go, this is just bad right now. It's not a good time. And I think it's a place where those who are involved in magic, this is a good time to step up your game and be aware and really do the work to see what matters. And I'm not saying what matters to me is the things that should matter to anybody else, but because I think that the system we're operating in is not functional for us anymore.
Definitely. But I would say that the corridor, these practices that you have invented and share with us on Weaving Fate is actually really helpful because for me it resonates because we have also a Greek author, very famous one, perhaps you know him. He's like the author of Alexis Zorbas, Nikos Kazantzakis, and he has this really famous phrase, we come from a dark abyss, we head to a dark abyss, but we call the luminous interval life. And you know, many people, most of us actually, we live our life as if it's a dark corridor that we can't stop running. We have to keep running in the dark. But this practice is actually really hopeful because it tells you, you can make this corridor your own. You can make it a luminous interval. You can open different doors. You can actually stop running. You can go right, left. You can stop. You know, and you can even go back. You can even retrace like your footsteps. Yeah. This is liberating, really.
But I think to me, that was the thing that was so interesting with this book. It was 6 ways I knew what it was going to be before I started, and this one I really didn't. And, pardon me, the tying into something we talked about very early on as far as kind of the magical influence on art and all of that stuff, this book, it was huge. Like, there was so much guidance that I was getting from whatever we want to call the things that I'm tapped into, that we're just saying, like, we're creating something that is useful for right now. And it's not that it won't be useful in the future, but it's targeted to right now. Like, these are practices that will be of benefit right now. And they were really on it. So there were things that were going to be in the book that were removed. There are things that were not going to be in the book that I was very heavily pushed to put into the book. And I had that experience that you spoke of where you're writing and you realize, like, when I was writing a lot of the journal entries for X, I was having those experiences with her as I was doing it. They were not like, I'm gonna figure out how to express a piece here. It's like it was the same process as doing my own. It's like I'm writing this stuff and I'm fully invested in it. And I could see how it was playing on her, right? Whether she is out there in some other time stream, as we
It
kind of
felt
hint
that way
at.
to me as well. That it felt like it was a real person, in your life
It
that you
really,
actually knew. Yeah.
yeah. It's got that, it's very heavy that way, in a way. This book was interesting. A few people have mentioned that they had like kind of pretty heavy emotional experiences with it, and I did writing it. Like, yeah, I cried a lot writing this book. Um, or like would write something and just have to go walk for an hour. Like, okay. Which I knew that that was a good thing, but it's also, you don't know if this is just going to mess with people in some way, because it's not the usual approach, right? For this stuff, it's not usually that personal. But I think it needs to be at this point. We have so much information on different ways of doing spells and rituals and historical models, but I think we're at a point where we really need to see what people are actually doing in their day-to-day in a way that is inviting, right? And that's a big thing for me, is there's stuff that is like, is this usable to somebody even if they don't know what I know, right? All of that stuff ties in. And I do think it is. We're at that interesting point. It's not, I was listening to an interview with Douglas Batchelor, who runs the What Magic podcast is this. It's something that he and I believe, talked about when I was on there, which was the idea that the world is always ending, right? It's always ending for some people.
Every day.
it's the, yeah, exactly. It's like every day. And so there's that sense that is kind of like it's a gestalt that shifts around in different locations. And there is a sense of fear or hopelessness or hope that comes out at different points. And to me, all of that stuff, and it's another thing that comes from what we were talking about before, is the train, the monoliths, train tracks and monoliths and weaving fate, or this work from this guy, Andrea Huberman, where he's saying that fear as a catalyst is what's supposed to happen. You get stimulated. There's this dump of norepinephrine, which is your adrenaline system, right? And you're supposed to move. That's what it's telling you to do. But I think that we have, for a lot of us, what happens is it's being triggered so constantly that we just want to crumble. It's too much. We just want to stop it. But that's not what it's for. That's not its function. And if you do that with it, you kind of begin to disempower yourself. And instead going, no, if you are feeling overwhelmed, that's kind of the lesson that he talks about with having David Goggins in his lab, was they run you through some things that are designed to find out what your fears are and then trigger them to see how you respond. And Goggins just was like, oh, this is my fear, hook me up. Like, he's like straight at it, because he learned that, like, no, I want that pressure. I want to be able to respond to that pressure.
Yeah.
I'm getting this dump of energy because my body knows, if I'm still in it, that that's what gives me the strength to move. But it's like we're rewarded to not move now, right? And so we're given these mixed messages. And so instead we become very static and stuck. And I think that all of the work in Weaving Fate is about, how do you get unstuck?
Yeah, that's true. We constantly have to, we don't move physically anymore, but at the same time we get the opposite, like, command. When it comes to our mind, it's like move, 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 produce, produce, produce all the time. Don't stand still, not even for a second, don't think. And this is not normal, is it? Because our ancestors were mobile creatures, highly mobile when it came to their bodies, but I think inside, perhaps they experienced more stillness than us, because they had to face that fear. They had to go out and fight with all kinds of, wild animals or other tribes, or, you had that alertness But as you write as well in your book, it was not this constant thing. It was like high peaks, and then you had the time to come back to yourself and, you know, look ahead, not constantly look down or to a screen.
And I think that's the big thing for me with the technology, particularly with the smartphones, is that the smartphones keep us constantly engaged at this low level. And depending on what you're doing, whether it's video games, you're triggering certain receptors in the brain. If you are, you know, doom scrolling the news or something, you're triggering all this stuff. And so you don't get any downtime. And that's the real issue there, is it's like, it's a very interesting thing if you go through periods where you don't touch any of that stuff. To go, okay, I'm just going to check out for 2 weeks and not pay any attention to any of it. And it's difficult depending on what you do for a living. But if you can kind of corral that stuff to one place, it's very beneficial, I think, because you go, oh, I forgot. For me, I had this with the smartphone before I began to figure out how to back away from it. Was like, okay, well, since I got that, I'm never really relaxed. I'm engaged with some strange version of information. It's not really the world, because the world is all of this wind and the ravens and the coyotes and my dogs and my goats and stuff. And yet, I'm giving this thing into the various kind of media structures on it, whether they be social or mass, far, far, far more time than I'm giving to the things that actually are directly affecting me.
So, yeah, the last part, which ties in again to what we were talking just now, is the Fever Stone, which is basically ancestral work, what you've given us there, this technique. And you know, today with all these new devices and modernity and whatnot, while in the past the ancestors were like something actually alive and part of every home. There was this ancestral little corner where you would make your offerings, you would like invoke your ancestors. It was something that you worked with, something familiar and revered. And at the moment it's completely forgotten and looked down upon. Actually, it's not good to look back to the past. I keep hearing this kind of catchphrases, aphorisms like we're never in the future, we're never in the past, these are fictions, and we're just in the present and live in the present. It might sound good upon first hearing, but if you actually think about it, it's very problematic, because you are a tree. In this, if you see yourself as a tree, you have roots and you have branches. You cannot say the past is a fiction. You cannot say the future is a fiction as well, and then just in the present, because then where are your branches and where are your roots? You know, where are your ancestors and where are your offspring? You don't think that way anymore. Do you think? With the Fever Stone, with other techniques by people who try consistently, at least within the magical field, to bring a bit of that back, the ancestral like worship and also animism back. Do you think we're heading that way, maybe, to this?
I think at least within the magical community we are, and I think it's good. Because again, I think it's innate in us. I don't think that that's a construct. And I think that for me, even like, I don't have close ties to my close-in ancestors, except my grandmothers are a little bit. But like spiritual ancestors, like Austin Spare hangs out in here with me. And then what I talk about is kind of deep line ancestors. Are very present for me. And my experience of it, and I'll be putting up a guided meditation thing that came from a course that I taught earlier this year as one of my blog posts the next couple months that deals with this. I think of it, what I talk about it there is I talk about it as being a red wave, being the blood wave. And the blood wave is everything that happened to allow us to be present, right? And if we look at, I look at kind of our, I don't view that kind of Homo sapiens is all of our ancestral chain, because biologically we go back much further than that, right? We're created out of other things. And so I view this as like this millions of years process that led to us, that was everybody that was able to survive and to have children and raise them up to have children. This is so many generations. It's crazy if you do the math. Even if you go, let's just go to like a particular point of 70,000 years ago, which most people would be comfortable with for Homo sapiens. It's super conservative. Work out that as a 15 or 20 year generations, because it would have been shorter generations back then for the most part than it is now. Mm-hmm. All of that I view as like this pressure wave. It's like literally like a wave in the ocean, that the ocean is the ancestors and it is pushing forward, and we're the leading edge of that wave. And so we don't exist without that. And there's this massive, massive reservoir of power that is pushing us into existence and pushing us through our existence. And this is true whether you have children or not. This is just present in the animal. It's not about necessarily continuing the line. It's just the fact that you got here is what matters. And that is this huge power source. It's not just that it's power, it's that it's a huge power source, that is all life that is invested in you. And being able to tap into that and to do some healing work around the damages in there frees up just a tremendous amount of energy. And in my experience with the Fever Stone practice, just the first section of washing the stone, that was a crazy experience to start for me, because it was given to me by allies. They told me explicitly what to do, and I went and did it. And again, it was one of those crazy things where I'm standing at the sink with my bottle of water and my rock crying, like, and getting this clear sense of like, thank you, from that force behind you. And so I think it's really important to tap into it. And I love that it's basically the gift. To me, it's a gift from the African traditional religions to the West, right? That this is something that never went away from the ATRs and the Diaspora religions. Mm. And I'm just really thankful that it has made it into kind of our edge of the world, because I think it's been desperately needed.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, I was in desperate need personally of this technique, the Fever Stone, that you said, because like you said, you didn't feel particularly connected to your like physical ancestry. I had a lot of work to do, like with my physical ancestry as well. And this Fever Stone was really, a liberating process for me. And it came at a time of my life that I particularly needed it. Because we had a death in my family very recently. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of karma there, let's say, that needed to be addressed. And that was very helpful. It helped my own process. And I thank you from my heart for this. My final question to you, and feel free to add, of course, anything else that you want and I haven't asked you about, is what does it mean for you to be a crossroader?
Oh, man. When I started magic, and I think I may have mentioned this in the books, but I don't remember. Mm-hmm. The guy who first got me actually practicing. So I'd done some stuff on my own, but the first guy that I met was a ceremonial magician named Clay. Mm-hmm. And Clay gave me this stack of books and taught me how to do the LBR, Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. He said, do this twice a day, every day. And I ended up doing that. So I was 18 when I met him. I was 20 when I met him, and I did it at least once a day, mostly twice a day. And I'm going to say I did it, but that's not actually true, but I'll get there in a second, for the next 7 years. Mm. And what happened was he also turned me on to chaos magic. And so once the LBR was fully stable and it was doing whatever it was doing, I started playing with variations. So I started playing with Peter Carroll's Gnostic Pentagram ritual. I was playing with some of the stuff that my friends who were interested in Norse paganism had developed around that form. I read Eliade's The Sacred and the Profane, where he begins to talk about the model of that I talk about in 6 Ways, which is again that structure that is present, I think, in the LBR and all of those rituals like it. I moved into the Star Ruby and realized, I don't think this thing's a banishing ritual. I don't think it ever was a banishing ritual.
I don't think so. For some reason,
it's like this multi-purpose tool, right? It's like a map to go anywhere, in a sense. And I'm meaning not specifically the LBR, but just that kind of structure of what Jason Miller calls the zone right in that format, where there's an above and below.
Yeah.
There's the directions around you. From that led me into, through connections in New Orleans to New Orleans voodoo, and William Gibson, and his writing about voodoo in some of his early books, in a strange way, kind of connected me to these crossroads entities as a specific thing, and then Hecate, different, clearly crossroads aspired things. And it brought me to realizing that that's what we're doing in all of those rituals, is we're basically drawing a crossroads through the space that we're standing in the center of. And so we're really we're kind of acknowledging ourselves as liminal beings. So it's not that you are necessarily calling to one of them, it's that you are becoming more and more like one of them, which is, again, I think that's the magician, right? As the magician is able to reach into different worlds or different aspects of the world and connect with the different allies or others that are there, or powers, even if you're not viewing it as a spirit model, even if you're viewing it as purely elemental powers or things like that. And so the crossroader is really acknowledging this really straight on and going, okay, I have this function that is almost separate from who I am in any other way. If I do this kind of work, I am becoming that conduit between the worlds. And so the crossroader invocation is really kind of just pulling that to the forefront of your mind and going, this is what I'm trying to do here. I'm fully in multiple worlds. I'm operating in the physical, in the non-physical, in the elemental realms, in the higher and lower realms. However you want to view those. There's no model that I'm attached to. And just getting really comfortable going, no, it's like, it's kind of that invocation thing, right? If we view invocation as I do, that we're kind of calling powers into ourselves, most magical work that we would do is doing this. If you are describing yourself as a God form, if you're calling that form through you, this is all invocation work, and it changes us. And I think that that's all crossroads work. And realizing you don't have to, it's not a physical place that you go to connect to the beings that do that thing. It's a thing that you become. And that's the concept behind that whole thing.
Yeah, something that you become, right? And at the same time, something that you already are. As a creature that partakes of 3 worlds, you are already across. It's 3, And past, present, future, again, a crossroad. We are on that crossroad every day. And your crossroader invocation, as well as the corridor, made me think about death a lot, and what it means if you're a journeyman, if you're really a traveler, a time traveler, then that has implications. If you can change the past, therefore it follows that death is not the end; it's the beginning. And then it's a cycle.
I totally agree. Yeah. I totally agree. And that's one of those things that's interesting. It's that piece in the book on death that's really tied into that as well, which is that idea of like, and it's funny because I got it from what we would consider shoddy sources. I know that my earliest idea of that came from reading Carlos Castaneda, who, as we know,
yeah, yes.
was essentially a fiction writer, right?
Yeah, well, I don't
uh,
know, maybe,
well,
when I
it's a
read him, I had the sense,
using what we were talking about earlier on fiction. Is fiction ever really just fiction, right?
yeah, he was
Because I
somewhere
believe there's a
else.
lot,
Maybe
but
not
he's, I think,
physically, but
and so I think he tapped into
yeah.
something very strong, and he talks about that, I think, in the early books about making death your ally, because your death is following you. It's one of the things that I love. Another oddity about the Odin kind of concept, right, is so he has thought and memory, right, and then he's got greedy and hungry, right, the wolves. And the wolves to me have always been like the clearest explanation of who he was, right? Because that is, I've always thought, the grave, right? It's the thing that you don't get to avoid. It's greedy, it's hungry, and it will get you, right? And that is that reference. It's such a fascinating concept if you look at that character, that conceptual idea of that being, even if you don't view it as a discrete spirit, as being this. Well, what's his nature? His nature is constantly aware of death. His nature is totally aware that he is projecting his thoughts forward. He's projecting his memory backwards, and he's influencing these things. I think it's in the Havamel that he says that though he's afraid of losing his mind, essentially, he's more afraid of losing his memories, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And we look at that view of realizing that he is the same as the field or the tree. That the sacrifice is always himself to himself. It switches. It's such a fascinating thing, because then again, it becomes just. I think it becomes an ally because it can move us into action. It can move us in going, okay, we're here for a limited time, and we don't know how long that is. So what do we want to do given that knowledge? And there's no right answer to that. That's going to be different for everyone. But it's one of the things that I think is another thing that's kind of ill, at least in the United States, is that we've moved death so far away from most people's experience. It becomes this abstraction. And so we get this weird kind of transhumanist ideas of, we can get to where we won't die because we'll just download everything.
Cryonics, all these kind of things that are very unnatural.
It's very weird to me, because again, it's the thing that's weird to me is you go, why are you viewing this as a bad thing? Because if you want to stop it, you're viewing it as a bad thing. What's bad about it? It just is the way that organisms are. It's the way that the universe appears to work. And so there's no, I don't understand the judgment there. It's fascinating.
I will add my 2 cents about the wolves. I think you will like this story. It's a story that my father used to tell me growing up, and I associated it after with the wolves of Odin. So the story is, he kept saying, everyone has 2 wolves inside of them, and they're constantly in battle between them. And one wolf is light, one wolf is dark, and the one that wins is the one you feed. So I was always thinking, Odin's wolves, hunger and greed, they're actually opposites. Hunger sounds like a ravenous kind of greedy thing, but hunger is also, desire. What motivates you is the fire inside you that pushes you to achieve that. Like it's the core of magic. You cannot attract anything if you don't have that desire. If it's quenched, then you're basically done. So I would also see these wolves as as the 2 wolves from the story of my dad, where one, you can motivate yourself with the hunger, but then you can destroy yourself with the greed. So there's this polarity.
No, I love that. I love that. I think, it's And I think that there's something beautiful about, I think one of the things that I love about the Northern stuff that we have it, and I kind of like the fact that we have it corrupted, like we have part of it, because it leaves it so wide open that interpreting it is very difficult, which is good because it makes you think. And I have random thoughts about these things all the time. One of the funniest experiences that I had in trance happened, I guess now about 4 years ago. And there's a tower that I talk about in 6 ways that for me is now this very fleshed out place. And I walked into the tower and it's changing all the time in there. I don't consciously change it, but it changes. And I walked in there once and there was this huge owl in there. It's pretty much white, grayish white, very tall. And I walked in and it was there. And it was like, it's the same to me as walking in if it was in my house. I was like, oh, you're a really big owl. And I asked it its name, and it said its name was Memory. And I thought, clearly in my head, I thought you were supposed to be a raven. And it totally laughed. But one of the things that was very funny about it is that it has been this kind of consistent ally in remembering my experiences in the other world. That when I come back in from those experiences, I will connect to that owl, whatever it is. It could be a thought structure, it could be a spirit, I don't know. And ask it to help me to remember, and it kind of anchors that whole thing down. And about 3 weeks ago, I went in there and it had added a raven. And it was very funny because I walked in and it's like this joke, right? You go, okay, I have a feeling what your name is, right?
That's
and to me, and it was a really interesting thing because again, there was this whole process that occurred, or that occurs now between that, and it's realizing that we're kind of internalizing these mythological ideas, and perhaps we're connecting to the spirits that live behind them.
Definitely. The owl in Greek mythology is the bird of Pallas Athena, memory, wisdom. Yep. So there you go.
Totally. So I have a question for you because I never get to talk about it with anybody, if I may.
No,
how did you tell me about your experiences with Mr. Freeze?
With
Jan Freeze.
Jan Freeze. Yeah, I pronounce it Jan.
It probably is.
So I couldn't understand. So I came to his work through Hell Runar. When I got interested in the runes as a magical system, because I had some very intense experiences with Odin. So I wanted to know as much as I could know, and I started collecting every book on runes that you could find. Some of them were good, some of them were really bad. None of them did it for me until I encountered Hell Runar, and that opened a massive window for me. It changed my view of history itself, because this first section that he has, where he does the overview of our past as nomadic tribes. He goes into, how the Germanic tribes functioned, all the lies about them, all that. He it's not that he rewrites history, he gives you an insight of how history has been rewritten by different interests, and how the external history ties with the internal history, the magical systems and how they develop. That was revolutionary for me. And of course, the system of magic that he describes after, the Galdr, the rune yoga, we'll call it that, all that is very, very powerful. And it resonated with a lot of things that I already was doing as a person on my own since I was very young. I didn't know what to call them. But there you had it, like a magical system based on words, which is very important for me as a writer. And Odin as well, yeah, the most important spirit guide for me personally. Thought and memory, massive things in my own culture as well. The Greek culture, the Norse gods are very similar to the Greek ones. We even have an equivalent of the Norns the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
But even though this might sound strange, personally I prefer the Norse cosmology because it was less fatalistic. In Greece, the mirror is a very heavy concept. It's like whatever they decree and you cut the thread and that's it. And the ancient Greek culture was very sober, very serious, and you had to always be aware of your place as a mortal that goes to Hades and drinks from the water of Lethe and all of these kind of things. While the Norse was more elemental, like more rough, like around the edges, wilder, but at the same time, it was more playful, and I liked that. I liked that you could interact with the gods in a more heads-on way rather than this reverent way. That's how I perceive it, at least. The concept of hell was much more friendly to me than the Greek Hades. Also, that you could go, as a warrior, and I mean a warrior of the spirit in this case, because like I never had an idea of Odin as the warrior god. This never appeared. This never came to me. You can go to Valhalla as a warrior of the spirit, and instead of saying if only, what if, you can let it resound with your name. Which again, it's not a concept that we have like in Greek religion. Some heroes, they can become constellations, but this, you sit on the table of the god, no. So this is what drew me. There was this resonance, this familiarity with the Norse myths that came through my tradition, the Greek tradition, but at the same time there were all these other things that I was going on about that I didn't find there, and I found in the Norse. And I don't believe in clear-cut divisions. I don't think egregores or spirits or whatever you want to call them identify, I'm Norse, I'm Greek. I don't think it works that way. I think it's working with the current is like how well you can carry that current as an emanation, as a person, and different currents can call out to you. Maybe you are born in a culture you cannot carry that current very well. Maybe you can carry another one, because we're all these hybrids anyway, these crossroads. And all these ideas I found in Jan Fries's work reinforced. And then I read Sideways, rather, because it has a relationship with Seder, the Norse magic tradition. And visual magic as well, the freestyle shamanism handbook, that was also techniques that I found there. I never found them anywhere else. All this wealth, and it's so syncretic, so, how can I say? It's very eclectic, but at the same time, it's not done in this remote scholarly way. It's very practical. It speaks to direct needs that you had, and it trains you really well. Like, I recommend it to everyone. If I had to have like one single book, now I would include this, basically. I wouldn't go anywhere without this now. But before it would be either Hellrunner or freestyle shamanism. These were the books that I was always saying out of everything that I've read. And Andrew Chambliss Anxiety as well, which is not as well known, but it's a very, it's a very Sparian work, in my opinion. It has a lot in common with the way Osman Spare worked. And again, a very writerly approach, a very visionary approach, creating this whole new spirit language. So,
for me, it was, I'd gotten into chaos magic and Faina and the Norse pagan stuff with the stuff that I had access to, which really started with some fiction and then reading the sagas and stuff early on and being really interested in. There was a way that, particularly in Njaal's saga, there was a mindset that was so different than what I saw around me, that was the really interesting thing. It wasn't necessarily the story itself, though the story is an interesting one, but there was a way that people were addressing things and how they were. I remember I was probably about 15 when I read that one, and I remember realizing at some point, like, okay, they're having this whole thing about this guy kills this other guy and he gets outlawed and all of this, but there's no sense that he's a bad person. It's just that he violated the rules of the society, and that there's for consequences. I was like, how is that we don't make this person evil in any way, right? And this is kind of an interesting thread that runs through some of the Norse sagas.
Yeah.
And I, had stumbled across Ramsay Dukes, who I love, and some other folks. But when I came across visual magic when it first came out, it was like, how I describe it is, it was like coming home. There was something about Free's approach that I was like, I liked him in a way that I liked Spare. And there was a way that he was so welcoming and funny, and like it's the first, like, it's so much magical writing is, I feel like, trying to hold people at a particular distance, and I felt like Freeze was trying to get you to come into his house. Like, you were walking by on the street. He's like, you need to come in so I can make you some food and we can hang out. And you could spend the night. That was my experience at Freeze. And so then I had a very similarly intense experience when Hellrunner came out, because it was the first of the Northern Magic books that I was like, this is my version of this. This is my take on this. This is not, because my take has never been the Edward Thorson take or any of that. It's like, no, this is way too rigid and weird and hierarchical. And it's almost like it's not weird enough, is my experience of a lot of that stuff. As I go, how did you guys come up with these systems that are so locked down when what you're looking at is so individualistic, right? I couldn't quite figure it out.
They try to hold on to the scholarly too much. The people that you mentioned, I think they're too afraid of being seen as the weird one, as you just said, to improvise, like, or experiment. They feel like they have to stick to this academic mindset, which is good, but sometimes, it can interfere when you do creative work massively. The two things are very different, and magic is like it's a creative work. You cannot stick to rules. So yeah, that's I think that is the main difference between the people you mentioned and Jan Fries. And yeah, Fries, for me, it was like, it's funny because you use the same word that I have used in my notes for this interview, if you see. When I said coming home, that your work felt like coming home to me, because it also reminded me of these forerunners of yours that I could see reflect very clearly in what you were writing. So yeah, it's the sense of belonging.
And I love the playfulness of Freeze, and I love the fact that from the word go, he's like, don't take my word for this. These are just things you could try and see what comes. And it's one of the great irritations that I find for people that prefer the much more locked down stuff, particularly with Hellrunner, is they're like, but he gives you 80 possible meanings for every rune and tells you that none of them are necessarily right. And I'm like, it's awesome, isn't it? They're like, no, it's not. I think he speaks to a particular kind of person. I love that about him. And then
you have to try them, the runes, for every person. If they start working with a specific rune in whatever way, for instance. Okay, this is okay. Maybe I'm saying too much here, but I had actually ingested Ansus at some point because I wanted to know more about Odin. So I just, I scribed it. I was drinking some cacao, and I just traced it on it, and then I did this trance, and I saw the things that I saw, and I experienced the rune Ansus. So there are, different ways, very subjective ways of experiencing these things. And of course, the meaning is going to be colored by who the person is, their state at the time, all those kind of things. So
I've had many experiences like that. It's one of the things that I really like about the runic system is because it's not codified. If you can find versions that are, but if you're coming from more of the Freeze approach of just looking at what information we do have and then playing, and exactly techniques like that. One of the funniest experiences that I had was I did a reading for myself and a woman I was involved with, and we were thinking about moving somewhere. And we were thinking about moving to Texas. We were living in San Francisco at the time.
Oh.
And we did the reading, and neither of us could make any sense of the reading. And but it was really clear, like the messages, this would go well if you did this, but we couldn't make sense of it. And within 6 months, things had gone to total hell with us, and we had split up and everything. And I was going through my old journals, and I found the reading, and the reading was perfectly clear. And the reading was, go where there are cows.
Oh, wow.
Which would, of course, be Texas when you're coming from San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it was such a funny thing, retrospectively, going like, oh, that's the clearest reading I ever could have gotten. And I could see how that would have changed what happened, because it would have moved us out of the environment we were in, which was really the issue that kind of drove wedges there. And I just love the openness to freeze, which I think really helped me with all of those processes. He's the one that I would say is exactly like you. When I wrote 6 Ways, that was my goal, was like, I want to only write things that are as useful as what he had done, because I had never found anything even close. There's lots of stuff that has good pieces in it, but he actually really helped me on all levels with his work. And then and just to bring up Chumbly is a really interesting character too, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if did you ever have any interaction with him?
In real life, no. I've met people that have, though, and their take was he was a very peculiar. I've been told that he was very feminine, which was interesting because I had a dream about him at some point, and his voice was this really, really feminine voice that I was like, really? And then I was told by an acquaintance of him that this is exactly how he spoke. He had this really annoying kind of feminine, high-pitched voice. So maybe I had an interaction with him in the spirit world. Who knows? I remember how I got my Azoetia, which was very hard to get, obviously, because they're so overpriced and out of print. You have to spend a lot of money that I didn't have at the time. And basically, I manifested it with my partner. I believe that we manifested this. There was no Azoetia at the time to speak of, and we really focused on it. And I was trying to visualize it, and then it came online. We found a copy on eBay that was actually reasonably priced, and we paid for it together, and we got it that way. Yeah, and I had actually invoked Samble, and I asked for it. I said, please, I really need to get access to this book. Help me. And maybe
that's awesome. I had found him through Chaos International magazine. He'd written a couple articles, and I'd picked those up when I was in England with the Peorages. And I got home. No, I was in New Orleans. And so I was in New Orleans, and I decided to write him because I think he had an address that you could write him, or I wrote him through Chaos International. And I had been writing under a different name at that point, and a little bit online in the Usenet days. And he sent me back a very nice letter, and basically kind of told me a little bit about why the Azoetia was what it was, that he written, that it was really kind of this dream book, and that he had written the book that he personally would have liked to have found, which I thought was a really great guide for writing books, and one that I have used since then.
Yeah.
And then when I came back to San Francisco, somewhere in there, I met Robert Fitzgerald, who's written a few books for Three Hands Press.
Okay, I have some of them, some anthologies that he has edited for them.
Yeah.
Like the Luminous Stone, and I think he's featured in that.
Yes. Yeah, and I had met Daniel Schulke.
Yeah. He was there.
Through, I wrote for his magazine Widdershins that went on. And so we hung out a little bit.
Now he's heading, isn't it? Schulke is heading Cultus Sabati now that...
yeah, he's the head of that at this point. Yeah. But and he had shown up at a Chaos Magic class that to check us out. Me and my friend Joseph Max had run. And so hanging out with them, it was funny. So Robert had a magazine called Esoterra. This all will tie in an interesting way with you. And Robert was headed to England to interview Alan Moore for his magazine.
Yeah.
And this is me being a horrible shit disturber, really, is where this came from. And so I think the three of us were together, and he said, I'm going to London. I'm going to be there for 3 weeks or something. Is there anything you want me to bring back? And I'm like, I knew that this is before there was anything but the first edition of Azoesha, and I knew it had been sold out for years. And I said, yeah, I would love you to bring me a copy of the Azoesha. And he's like, okay. And he actually found 3 copies. So it was for him, for myself, and for Daniel. And also Ketub had just been published, so he got us 3 copies of that. And then Gavin Semple's book on Spare, Zoskia. And so that's how I got my copy of the Azoesha.
That's pure magic at work.
It was pure magic. It was great.
And 3 as well, your favorite number.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think that all of what I like about, for me, magic is, there's a big piece of magic that I would like to see more, which is, and we're seeing more of it now. I would like to see more of it outside of the kind of Wiccan world, which is where it's really prevalent, but more in the other stuff, which is really this idea that this doesn't have to be a life focus as far as the study, And I think that that's what I got from Freeze as well, as he was kind of like, here's just some things you could try and see what they do. And that's always been what I've kind of aimed to do ever since, I think. Because I think that it's really needed. And I think it's the piece that's missing for a lot of us. I'm not saying that it's the piece that's missing for everyone, because I don't know. But I think that there are a lot of us who are, like we said earlier, the bit of the weirdos in the current culture. And I think that magic is a worldview that can be very beneficial if you don't fit into that culture very well.
I totally agree with you. I have to say, though, since we were discussing the Azoesha and like how hard it is to get your hands on it, sometimes we make it difficult, even if there is a bit of elitism sometimes, even if somebody wants to approach these things, they're not necessarily readily available, even to those of us that go to great lengths to get them. So this format for me, although it's not, in books like that, and Scarlet Imprint is another like a publisher
beautiful
that I really
stuff.
love. Yeah, I love their books, especially the talismanic editions. But it's not something everyone can afford. But they have the most affordable version. They have the bibliothecars that everyone can afford. This didn't happen so much with Three Hands Press.
They're starting to. I don't know what's going on there. I'm not in contact with them really. But though I'm waiting for the Green Mysteries someday, hopefully.
Green Mysteries, is that the book by Schulke?
I
think you can order that actually.
I think you can.
You can pre-order it, but yeah, it's not.
I think I pre-ordered. I'm pretty sure I pre-ordered it 5 years ago. At this point, it might have been only 4, but yeah, I love Scarlet Imprint's work. I love. Probably Alkistis is my favorite person to hear talk on magical stuff. There's something really amazing about her energy and her mind all together is a beautiful.
And then with Peter Gray, they're a dynamo together.
Absolutely.
Very, very powerful synergy, magical and love synergy between them.
Yeah,
alchemy, truly. Yeah. These are 2 other people that I plan to invite at some point.
I would love to hear it. Yeah, I'd love to.
But yeah, I really love this format. I think it's something that everyone can access and make their lives better and hopefully change their mindset about all these things. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just many thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you. Absolutely.
It's really good to meet you.
Same. So happy always it's rare to meet people like this. And sometimes, you're not going to be necessarily in the same country with the people that resonate with you, and it makes it hard to work as a group, as a practitioner. It's very hard to find. Obviously you can try different things working with different people, but in the end, a lot of the work is solitary because of this reason. But technology, it has the positive aspect of
it has its positive aspects for sure.
These meetings. And I want to thank you so much from my heart for being here and accepting this invitation. And I also, to close, I would like to thank everyone who joined us to listen to this, but also especially to the people who came from the previous episode and they followed to this one. Thank you so much, from my heart. You have no idea what it meant to me when you were reaching out to me, sending me all these positive, enthusiastic messages about this, because it's really hard for freelancers to continue to have an output. The only thing that can make it possible is your support, and that for me, it meant the world. So, and my personal final message to you is basically one word: it's abracadabra. And before you laugh, it's Aramaic. It's abracadabra, really, which means I create as I speak, as the word. And also it means let it be destroyed in another interpretation. So destroy what you don't want around you. Destroy the fear.
I love that word. It's a beautiful word.
Me too. And it's your dreams. It's what you write in your book constantly. Your dreams are what will free you from the narratives of others and create your reality. So either you believe in magic, or you don't. Your dreams are still the one and only thing that will create your own world. So
absolutely. It is an interesting thing to, if I was to throw anything out, the only thing I would say is, great appreciation to everybody that has read any of my stuff or supported any of it in any way. It is very strange to write this kind of thing and throw it out into the world, because you just have no idea if it will actually be as useful as you hope it will be. And so far, the feedback that I've gotten has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm just hugely appreciative of that.
Same here. Thank you from my heart, and see you very soon.
Absolutely.